Hey, my name is Mason Reed. I'm 27 years old and I live in a small town in Oregon that most people have never heard of. I work with wood. That's what I do. I build custom furniture, cabinets, sometimes even whole pieces for people who want something that actually lasts. My workshop sits behind the little house I bought 3 years ago after my marriage fell apart. It's quiet back there. Just the sound of the saw, the smell of sawdust, and my own thoughts. I like it that way. For a long time, I thought I was fine with being alone. I wasn't happy exactly, but I wasn't miserable either. I had a routine: wake up early, work until my hands hurt, eat whatever I could throw together, and fall asleep with the TV on low so the silence wouldn't feel so loud. I didn't hate people, I just didn't need them anymore. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Then Emily Parker moved in next door with her 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Emily was the kind of woman who looked like she had everything under control. Tall, dark hair always pulled back, always dressed like she was ready for a meeting even when she was just taking out the trash. But if you watched her long enough, you could see the cracks. The way she checked her phone too often. The way she sometimes stood on her porch at night staring at nothing. She was holding it together, but just barely. Lily, though. Lily was different. She was all energy and questions and scraped knees. From the first week they moved in, she treated my workshop like it was some kind of wonderland. She'd stand at the fence and watch me work, asking 100 questions about what I was building and why wood smelled the way it did. I never encouraged her. I wasn't trying to be the friendly neighbor. But kids have a way of ignoring boundaries you didn't even know you were setting. We kept our distance. Emily and I would wave when we saw each other in the driveway. Sometimes we'd talk for a couple minutes about the weather or how the fence needed painting. Nothing deep, nothing real, just enough to be polite. I figured that was how it would stay. Two people living side by side, close enough to say hello, far enough that neither of us had to care. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night in October. The kind of rain that doesn't just fall, it attacks. Wind whipping the trees, water coming down in sheets so thick you could barely see the streetlights. I was in the living room with the lights low, half watching some documentary I wasn't really paying attention to when I heard it. 3 soft knocks on the front door. I almost didn't answer. It was almost 10 o'clock, and nobody in this town knocked on doors that late unless something was wrong. But something in the sound made me get up. Maybe it was how small the knocks were, like whoever was out there didn't want to be heard but needed to be. I opened the door and looked down. Lily stood there in the rain, barefoot on my porch, wearing yellow pajamas that were already soaked through. Her dark hair was plastered to her face. Her eyes were red and swollen like she'd been crying for hours. She was shaking so hard I could see it even in the dim porch light. For a second, neither of us moved. The rain poured down behind her, loud and relentless. She looked up at me with those big, terrified eyes, and I felt something shift in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. She reached out with one small hand and grabbed 2 of my fingers. Her skin was ice cold. Then she whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear it over the storm, "I need a dad before Friday." I froze. The words didn't make sense at first. They just hung there in the air between us, heavy and wrong. Lily's lower lip trembled. She squeezed my fingers tighter like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. "If I don't have one," she said, her voice cracking, "they're going to take me away from my mom." I stood there in the doorway, rain blowing in sideways onto my bare feet, staring at this little girl who had somehow found her way to my house in the middle of the worst storm we'd had all year. My mind was blank. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. All I could do was feel the cold of her hand in mine and the way her whole body was shaking. Behind her, the rain kept falling, hard, unforgiving, like the sky itself was angry. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something crack open inside me. Something I had kept locked away since the day my ex-wife walked out and took the last piece of hope I had left. I looked down at Lily's small, scared face, and I knew, without knowing how or why, that nothing in my life was going to stay the same after this moment. The rain kept falling, and I stood there, holding a little girl's hand, wondering what the hell I had just stepped into. I don't know how long we stood there. It couldn't have been more than a minute or two, but it felt longer. The rain was still coming down hard, and Lily's hand was like ice in mine. She didn't cry. She just looked up at me with those wide, frightened eyes, waiting for something I didn't know how to give. Then I heard footsteps splashing through the puddles in the driveway. Emily appeared out of the dark like a ghost, wearing an oversized raincoat thrown over what looked like pajamas. Her hair was wet, her face pale with panic. She ran the last few steps and dropped to her knees in front of Lily, pulling her into a tight hug. "Lily, baby, what are you doing?" Her voice was shaking. "I told you to stay inside." Lily buried her face in her mother's shoulder but didn't let go of my fingers. Emily looked up at me, and I saw the exact moment she realized how bad this looked. "I'm so sorry, Mason," she said quickly, standing up with Lily still clinging to her. "She must have slipped out when I was in the bathroom. I didn't even know she was gone until I heard the door. I'm really, really sorry." I stepped back to let them inside. The rain was blowing in, and Lily was soaked to the bone. Emily hesitated for a second, then carried her daughter into my living room. I grabbed a blanket from the couch and handed it to her without a word. Emily wrapped Lily up and sat her on the edge of the couch, rubbing her arms to warm her. She kept apologizing, her voice low and frantic. But I wasn't really listening. I was watching Lily. She had stopped shaking, but her eyes were still too big for her face. She looked exhausted. After a few minutes, Emily stood up. "I should get her home. Thank you for answering the door. I know it's late." I nodded. I still hadn't said anything. My throat felt tight. Emily paused at the door, Lily half asleep against her shoulder now. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes I recognized. It was the same look I used to see in the mirror after my divorce. The look of someone who was running out of ways to keep everything from falling apart. "I'll come by in the morning," she said quietly. "If that's okay. I think I owe you an explanation." I nodded again. She left, and the house felt even quieter than before. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Emily showed up just after 9. She had changed into jeans and a simple sweater, but she still looked tired. Lily was with her, wearing fresh clothes and carrying a small stuffed rabbit. The little girl gave me a shy smile when she saw me, like last night hadn't happened. Emily asked if we could talk. I made coffee and we sat at the small table in my kitchen. Lily wandered into the living room and started looking at the wood samples I had stacked on the coffee table. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Emily took a deep breath and started talking. Her ex-husband's name was Daniel Parker. He was a lawyer in Portland, successful, well-connected, and very good at getting what he wanted. They had been divorced for almost 2 years, but he had never really let go. Now he was fighting for full custody of Lily. "He's saying I can't provide a stable environment," Emily said, staring into her coffee. "That I moved her to a small town with no family support. That I don't have a steady job or a proper home life. His lawyers are painting me as unstable." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. I make enough. Lily is happy here, but apparently that's not good enough for the court." I listened without interrupting. I had learned a long time ago that sometimes people just need to say the words out loud. Emily looked up at me. Her eyes were tired but steady. "The final hearing is this Friday. If the judge decides I'm not fit, Lily could be sent to live with Daniel full-time. He's already talking about moving her to Portland, putting her in private school, the whole thing." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I'm not asking you to pretend to be anything," Emily said quickly. "I don't want you to lie for me. I wanted you to understand why Lily came here last night. She's scared. She heard me on the phone with my lawyer. She knows something big is happening." I looked over at Lily in the living room. She was sitting on the floor now, carefully lining up pieces of wood like she was building something. Completely absorbed. Completely innocent. "What do they need to see?" I asked. Emily blinked. "What? The court? What do they need to see to believe you can give her a stable home?" She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "A family. A real one. Not just a single mom and her kid in a small house. They want to see that Lily has someone steady in her life. Someone who shows up. Someone who stays." The word "stays" hung in the air between us. I thought about my own empty house, about the years I had spent making sure no one could ever leave me again by never letting anyone get close in the first place. I thought about Lily standing on my porch in the rain, holding my fingers like I was the only solid thing in her world. And I thought about how, for the first time in 3 years, I hadn't felt completely numb when I opened my door last night. "I'll help," I said. Emily looked at me sharply. "Mason, you don't have to." "I know I don't," I cut in. "But I'm going to anyway, at least until after the hearing. I can come over for dinner a few times. Be around when the social worker shows up, whatever you need." She stared at me like she was trying to figure out if I was serious. Then she nodded slowly, and I saw her shoulders drop just a fraction, like she had been holding her breath for months. "Thank you," she said softly. I didn't answer. I just looked over at Lily again, who had started humming to herself while she played. That night after they left, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy. I kept thinking about what Emily had said. Someone who stays. I hadn't stayed for anyone in a long time, not since my ex-wife walked out and took every promise we had made with her. I had gotten good at leaving first, at keeping my world small and safe and empty, but Lily had shown up on my doorstep with nothing but fear and a stuffed rabbit, and something inside me had shifted. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if I could actually help. I didn't even know if I was making a mistake. All I knew was that for the first time in years, I didn't want to go back to being completely alone. I closed my eyes and let the quiet of the house settle around me. Tomorrow, I would go next door for dinner. And after that, I had no idea what would happen. But I was going to show up anyway. I started going over to Emily's house for dinner 3 nights later. It was awkward at first. I showed up with a bottle of wine I didn't even know if she drank, and Emily greeted me at the door like I was some kind of formal guest. Lily, on the other hand, acted like I had always belonged there. She grabbed my hand the second I stepped inside and dragged me toward the kitchen, talking a mile a minute about the picture she drew at school and how her teacher said it was the best one in the whole class. The house felt different from mine, louder, warmer. There was music playing softly from somewhere and the smell of something with garlic and tomatoes coming from the stove. Lily kept running between the living room and the kitchen, asking questions, showing me things, and I found myself answering without thinking too hard about it. Emily watched us from the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. She didn't say much at first, but I could feel her studying me, like she was still trying to figure out if I was actually going to stick around, or if I would disappear the second things got complicated. I stayed. The first dinner was quiet in the way new things are quiet. We talked about safe subjects, the weather, how the garden out back needed weeding, what Lily was learning in second grade. Emily asked about my work, and I told her about the custom dining table I was building for a couple in Portland. She listened like she actually cared, and that surprised me more than I wanted to admit. By the third night, something had shifted. Lily started setting a place for me at the table without being asked. She put my fork on the left side because she said I was left-handed, even though I had never told her that. Emily noticed and gave me a small, tired smile across the table. It was the first time I had seen her smile without it looking forced. The house was noisy in a way I had almost forgotten existed. Lily argued with her mother about whether broccoli counted as a vegetable if it was covered in cheese. Emily called out from the kitchen asking if anyone wanted more water. There were footsteps running down the hallway and the sound of a cartoon playing in the background on low volume. It was chaotic and ordinary and alive. I hadn't realized how much I missed that kind of noise until I was sitting in the middle of it. One evening, about a week after I had started coming over, Emily mentioned that the kitchen faucet had been dripping for days. I offered to take a look. She hesitated for a second, then nodded and handed me the toolbox from under the sink. Lily immediately climbed up onto the counter and sat cross-legged, watching with serious concentration. Every time I asked for a wrench or a screwdriver, she handed it to me like we were performing surgery. Her tongue stuck out slightly from the corner of her mouth when she focused, and I had to bite back a smile. Emily stood a few feet away, leaning against the opposite counter with her arms crossed. She wasn't saying anything, but I could feel her watching us. Not with suspicion this time, something softer. Something that looked almost like hope. When I finally got the faucet working again, Lily clapped like I had just performed a magic trick. Emily laughed under her breath, and for a moment, the three of us just stood there in the small kitchen, the air between us lighter than it had been since the night Lily showed up on my porch. I should have known it wouldn't last. It was a Friday evening, and I had stayed later than usual to help Emily move a bookshelf in the living room. Lily was in her bedroom changing into pajamas when we heard a car pull into the driveway. Emily froze. I saw the color drain from her face before I even turned around. The front door opened without a knock. Daniel Parker walked in like he still owned the place. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in a courtroom or a boardroom. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me, taking in my work boots and the flannel shirt I hadn't bothered to change out of. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Emily," he said, his voice smooth, "I didn't realize you had company." Emily's voice was tight. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" He ignored the question and looked at me again, head tilting slightly. "So, this is the new addition. I heard you were playing house." I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. Emily stepped forward, putting herself between us. "You can't just show up like this. We have an agreement." Daniel's smile widened, but it was cold. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on my daughter. Is she here?" Before Emily could answer, Lily appeared in the hallway. She had changed into her yellow pajamas again, the same ones she had been wearing the night she came to my door. She took one look at Daniel and immediately stepped back, her small hand reaching out and grabbing the sleeve of my shirt. She didn't say anything. She just held on. Daniel noticed. His eyes flicked down to where Lily's fingers were curled around my arm and something dark passed across his face. "Interesting," he murmured. "Emily started recruiting for the family role already, huh?" The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were clever, but because they were said in front of Lily like she wasn't even there. Like she was just a piece in whatever game he was playing. I felt Lily's grip tighten on my sleeve. She pressed closer to my side, and I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to pick her up and carry her out of the room. Out of this house, away from whatever this man represented. Emily's voice was shaking when she finally spoke. "You need to leave. Now." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then at me again. He gave a small nod like he had seen everything he needed to see. "I'll see you in court on Friday," he said, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, and the house felt too quiet again. Lily didn't let go of my sleeve for a long time. Emily stood in the middle of the living room with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the floor. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix any of this. Later that night, after I had walked back to my own house, I sat in my workshop with the lights off. The smell of sawdust and wood stain filled the air, familiar and grounding. But for the first time, it didn't feel like enough. I kept thinking about the way Lily had reached for me without hesitation. About the way Emily had looked at Daniel like she was bracing for a fight she had already lost too many times. About how quiet my house felt compared to the one next door. I had told myself I was just helping until Friday. Just showing up for a few dinners, playing the part of the steady neighbor, then stepping back once the hearing was over. But something had changed tonight. I wasn't sure I could step back anymore. I ran a hand over the half-finished table in front of me and exhaled slowly. Whatever happened on Friday, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Daniel Parker take Lily away without a fight. And I wasn't going to disappear on Emily either. Not this time. 2 days before the hearing, everything started to fall apart. I found out through Emily's lawyer. Daniel's team had done their homework. They had pulled my divorce records, talked to people who barely knew me, and painted a picture of a man who had fallen apart after his marriage ended. A man who had spent almost a year barely leaving his house. A man who was, in their words, emotionally unstable. They used it to argue that Emily was putting her daughter in a dangerous environment by living next to someone like me. I didn't go over for dinner that night. Instead, I stayed in my workshop until almost midnight, sanding the same piece of wood over and over again until my hands were raw and the air was thick with sawdust. I didn't want to see the look on Emily's face when she found out. I didn't want to see the doubt that would probably be there now. I had told myself from the beginning that I was just helping until Friday, that I wasn't really part of this. But now my past was being used as a weapon against the one person who had started to make me feel like maybe I could be something more than alone. I was still there when I heard the side door open. Emily stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind her. She didn't turn on the overhead light. She just stood there for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the dim glow of the single lamp I had on. Then she walked over and sat down on the old wooden stool across from me without saying a word. I kept sanding. My hands were shaking slightly, but I didn't stop. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't say the things people usually say when they think someone is falling apart. She just sat there, watching me work, until I finally put the sandpaper down and looked at her. I didn't know they would do that, she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. I'm sorry, Mason, you didn't sign up for any of this. I shook my head. It's not your fault. We were quiet for a long time. The only sounds were the occasional creak of the old building and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Then Emily started talking. She told me about the early years of her marriage. How Daniel had been charming at first, attentive, the kind of man who made her feel like she was the center of his world. How slowly, over time, that charm had turned into control. How he had made her question every decision she made, every friend she kept, every part of herself that didn't fit into the life he wanted. I spent years believing I wasn't good enough, she said, staring at her hands. That if I just tried harder, if I was quieter, if I smiled more, maybe he would stop looking at me like I was a disappointment. I thought it was my fault when he started staying out late, when he stopped touching me, when he started telling me I was lucky he stayed at all. She laughed softly, but it was bitter. I actually believed him. For a long time, I really did. I listened without interrupting. I knew what it felt like to carry shame that didn't belong to you. I knew what it felt like to let someone else's voice become louder than your own. Emily looked up at me then, and her eyes were clear. Tired, but clear. I don't think that anymore, she said, but I'm still scared. Every single day. I'm scared that the judge will look at me and see exactly what Daniel wants him to see. A single mom who can't give her daughter everything, a woman who isn't enough. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was losing Lily. But lately, I've started to realize that the worst thing might be letting her grow up believing that this is what love looks like, that this is what she deserves. I felt something tighten in my chest. For the first time in years, I started talking too. I told her about my marriage, about how I had thought I was building a life with someone who saw me, only to realize she had been looking right through me the entire time. I told her about the months after the divorce when I had stopped answering the phone, stopped going to work, stopped being anything resembling a person. I didn't tell her everything, some wounds were still too raw to show, but I told her enough. Enough that she would understand why Daniel's lawyers had been able to use me so easily. Emily didn't interrupt. She didn't look at me with pity. She didn't try to tell me it wasn't that bad or that I would be fine. She just listened, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes steady on mine. When I finally ran out of words, the workshop felt smaller than before, more intimate. Like we had carved out a space that belonged only to the two of us. Emily stood up slowly and walked around the workbench. She stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with sawdust. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm against my skin. She didn't squeeze. She didn't pull me toward her. She just held on, like she was anchoring herself as much as she was anchoring me. Some people don't come into your life to save you, she said quietly. They come to sit beside you until you can stand up on your own. I looked down at our hands, at the way her fingers fit between mine like they had always been meant to be there. I thought about how long it had been since anyone had touched me without expecting something in return. I thought about Lily's small hand grabbing my sleeve 2 nights ago and how natural it had felt to stand between her and the man who wanted to take her away. I thought about the empty house waiting for me next door, and how, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't want to go back to it. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke again. I don't know what's going to happen on Friday, Mason. But I'm glad you're here, even if it's just for now. I didn't answer with words. I just tightened my fingers around hers and let the silence stretch between us, comfortable and heavy and real. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then went quiet. Inside the workshop, the two of us stood together in the dim light, holding on to something neither of us had expected to find. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was drifting anymore. I felt like I was finally standing still. And for now, that was enough. The courtroom was colder than I expected. It was Friday morning, and the hearing had already been going on for almost 2 hours. Daniel sat on one side with his expensive lawyer and his perfectly pressed suit, looking every bit the successful, stable father he wanted the judge to see. Emily sat on the other side with me standing behind her. She had Lily's small hand in hers, and I could see how tightly she was holding on. Daniel had everything on paper: money, connections, a polished image. Emily had a small house in a quiet town, a freelance job, and a 7-year-old who still climbed into her bed some nights because she was scared of the dark. On paper, it didn't look like much. But sometimes the things that matter most don't look like much on paper. When the judge asked if anyone had anything else they wanted to say before he made his decision, the room went quiet. Daniel's lawyer closed his folder with a satisfied snap. Emily's shoulders were tense, and I could feel the fear radiating off her in waves. I wasn't planning to speak. I had told myself I would just stand there, be present, and let the lawyers do what lawyers do. But when I looked down at Lily and saw the way she was watching her mother with wide, worried eyes, something inside me refused to stay silent. I stepped forward. The judge looked at me, surprised. "Mr. Reed?" I cleared my throat. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. I wasn't good at speeches. I never had been. But I knew how to speak the truth when it mattered. "I'm not Lily's father," I started. "Not biologically, not legally. I'm just the guy who lives next door, the one who fixes things when they break and sometimes stays for dinner." I glanced at Lily. She was staring at me now, her small face serious. "I know I don't look like much compared to what Mr. Parker can offer," I continued. "I don't have a big house or a fancy job or a long list of accomplishments. What I do have is time and attention, and the kind of quiet that lets a kid know they're safe." The judge was watching me carefully. Daniel's face had gone still. "Lily hates pink marshmallows," I said. "She cries during movies about animals getting hurt, even the cartoon ones. When she's worried, she tells herself stories out loud in her room so she won't feel so alone. And every single time she gets scared, the first person she runs to is her mom." I looked directly at Emily then. Her eyes were shining, but she didn't look away. "I don't know what the legal definition of a family is," I said. "I'm not a lawyer. I don't have the right words for this. But I know what safety looks like on a child's face. I know what it sounds like when a little girl stops holding her breath because she finally believes someone is going to stay. And I know that Emily Parker gives that to her daughter every single day, even when she's terrified she's not enough." The courtroom was completely silent. I took a breath and finished. "Lily doesn't need a bigger house or more money. She needs her mom. And she needs to know that the people who love her aren't going to disappear when things get hard. That's what Emily has given her. That's what she deserves to keep." I stepped back. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For the first time since the hearing started, Daniel looked unsure. The judge took a long moment before he spoke. When he finally did, his voice was calm and clear. "Custody is awarded to the mother," he said. "Full custody, with reasonable visitation rights for the father." Emily made a sound I had never heard before, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Lily turned and threw herself into her mother's arms, crying so hard her whole body shook. Emily held her tightly, rocking her gently, whispering words I couldn't hear over the noise in the room. I stood there watching them, feeling something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Relief. And something deeper. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Later, after the papers were signed and the courtroom had emptied, we stood outside in the weak autumn sunlight. Lily had finally stopped crying, but she was still holding onto Emily's hand like she was afraid to let go. She looked up at me with those big eyes that had started everything. "Uncle Mason?" she said quietly. I crouched down so we were eye level. "Yeah, kiddo?" She hesitated, then asked in the smallest voice I had ever heard from her, "Can I call you Dad? For real this time. Not pretend?" The question hit me harder than anything Daniel's lawyers had thrown at me all morning. I felt my throat close up. For a second, I couldn't speak. Emily was watching us, her hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder. She didn't push. She didn't answer for me, she just waited. I looked at this little girl who had shown up on my porch in the middle of a storm and somehow changed everything. I thought about the empty house I used to go home to every night. I thought about the way the three of us had started to feel like something real. I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Yeah, I said, my voice rough. Yeah, you can. If that's what you want. Lily's face broke into the biggest smile I had ever seen on her. She launched herself at me, wrapping her small arms around my neck so tightly I almost lost my balance. I hugged her back, closing my eyes against the sudden burn behind them. I want that, she whispered against my shoulder. I really want that. 1 year later, the house next door wasn't quiet anymore. I stood on the front porch on a cool October afternoon, hammering the last nail into a new wooden sign I had made. It read, "The Reed Parker House," in simple, clean letters. Nothing fancy, just true. Emily came out carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to me and leaned against the railing, watching Lily chase a butterfly around the front yard in her yellow rain boots. The leaves were starting to turn and the air smelled like wood smoke and fallen apples. She's going to want you to push her on the swing later, Emily said, smiling softly. I know, I answered. I already promised. We stood there in comfortable silence for a while, the way we had learned to do. No need to fill every space with words, just presence. Just the steady rhythm of a life we had built together, one dinner and one late-night conversation at a time. Lily ran over and wrapped her arms around my leg, out of breath and laughing. Dad, come play! I set my coffee down and let her pull me toward the yard. Emily watched us go, and when I glanced back, she was smiling in that quiet way she had when she thought no one was looking. I had spent so many years believing that the best I could hope for was to be left alone. That safety meant keeping the world at arm's length. But Lily had knocked on my door in the middle of a storm, and Emily had shown me what it meant to stay even when things got hard. This wasn't the life I had planned. It was better. As Lily tugged me toward the swing set, I looked back at the house, our house, with its warm lights glowing in the windows and the new sign hanging proudly above the door. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was finally home.